In the last grip of winter, when snow still clung to the fields around Columbus, Wisconsin, the town moved with the slow certainty of a place that believed it understood itself. Doors were often left unlocked. Neighbors knew which truck belonged in which driveway. The cold was harsh but familiar. Trouble was supposed to come from weather, not from inside a home before sunrise. That is what made the morning of March 1980 feel so wrong. At 7:15 a.m., Lane McIntyre drove home from the mill after working the night shift. He was tired, cold, and thinking about the simple comfort waiting for him inside. A warm bed, a quiet house. His 18-year-old wife, Marilyn, their infant son, Christopher, sleeping in the back room. It was an ordinary kind of hope, the kind people build their whole lives around without realizing how fragile it is. Then he stepped onto the porch and saw Clyde, the dog, chained near the front door. Clyde did not greet him the usual way. He shrank back. That alone felt wrong. When Lane opened the door, the rest of his life split into a before and an after. Marilyn McIntyre was lying on the living room floor in a nightgown, covered in blood. A paring knife was still in her chest. Her body showed the kind of violence that does not happen by accident and does not happen without fury. She had been beaten, she had been strangled, she had been stabbed. There were signs of sexual trauma. Everything about the scene carried the same message. This was personal. This was close. This was someone who came with more than anger. Someone came with grievance. Lane froze, then fell beside her, reaching for a pulse that was not there. He ran to the next unit and asked if anyone had seen or heard anything. Then another thought tore through him. Christopher. He rushed to the bedroom and found the baby alive in his crib, unharmed. That detail would stay with the case for decades. In a home filled with violence, the baby was spared. Before 911 was common, help was slower and more human. Lane called his mother because he did not remember the sheriff department number. Within minutes, the small house became a crime scene, and a private tragedy became public property. In Columbus, a murder like this was not just a crime, it was a rupture. Marilyn was young, known as kind, soft-spoken, easy to talk to. She had not lived an easy childhood. Her mother died in a car crash when she was 5. She grew up moving through foster homes, learning early that safety could disappear without warning. The one thing she seemed to want most was stability. A roof overhead, a family that stayed, a home that did not vanish. She met Lane young. She was 16. He watched over her through the years when her life was unsettled. When she was 17, they married. They did not have much, but to Marilyn, enough was enough. She became a mother at 18 and poured herself into Christopher. People around her saw a young woman trying to give her son the childhood she never had. There were little rituals in that marriage that made the loss feel even crueler. She packed Lane's lunches. She bit the corner of one sandwich before wrapping it, a quiet sign that she loved him. For a young couple living simply, those gestures were their version of wealth. Now she was dead on the floor, and her husband was the one who found her. That made Lane the first name in everyone's mind. In cases like this, the husband always becomes two people at once, the grieving man and the possible killer. People tell themselves they are being rational, but emotion gets there first. He was the one who came home. He was the one with access. He was the one whose reactions would now be examined second by second, breath by breath, word by word. And his behavior immediately became part of the story. A neighbor said the dog had barked during the night. She also thought Lane seemed too calm after finding Marilyn. He had gone next door. He had spoken clearly. He had not fallen apart in the way some people expected. In moments like that, grief itself goes on trial. If a man screams, people say it looks staged. If he speaks too quietly, they say he knows too much. Most people understand this uncomfortable truth. There is no approved way to break. Inside the house, there was no forced entry. Nothing appeared stolen. The rest of the home was not ransacked. That narrowed the picture fast. Marilyn either knew the person who came to the door, or the person had enough familiarity to enter without causing alarm. A tiny stain was also found in the bathroom sink, so small it looked almost meaningless. It was preserved anyway. At the time, nobody knew that nearly 30 years later, that pinhead of blood would become the most important witness in the room. The timing mattered too. During the night, neighbors were awakened by Clyde pulling so hard at his chain that it shook against the porch. Later, Marilyn's brother-in-law, Eli Williams, described driving past the house twice. The first time, it was dark and the dog was not outside. The second time, around 3:15 a.m. The porch light was on, and the dog was tied out front, something Lane and Marilyn normally did not do in the middle of. That suggested Marilyn was still alive around 3:15 a.m. It also meant whoever came to the house likely came late, after midnight, after routine had settled, when a familiar knock could still get a door opened. Eli became a suspect because he was there at the right time, and because Marilyn would have let him in. He was strong enough to overpower her. He was family, but there was nothing physical tying him to the scene. An old boyfriend, Aaron Henderson, drew attention too. He lived nearby and did not offer a strong account of his night. A family friend named Kurt Forbes moved higher on the list when word spread that he had long been interested in Marilyn. He and his girlfriend Misty spent time with Lane and Marilyn. The couples played cards. They fished together. Kurt could be flirtatious with Marilyn, but she was said to be repulsed by him. That detail matters because it changes the emotional geometry of the case. What one person calls attraction, another experiences as unease. People often miss that difference until it is too late. Still, Lane remained the shadow hanging over everything. The marriage was not perfect. Friends had seen arguments. Lane admitted he had slapped Marilyn during one fight and felt ashamed of it. The mill where he worked was less than 15 minutes from home, and he had a regular break around 3:00 a.m. that created a window. He could have left work, driven home, committed the murder, and returned before drawing attention. Then came another fact the town could not let go of. Not long before Marilyn died, Lane had taken out a life insurance policy, $25,000 on himself, and a rider covering Marilyn for $10,000. For a struggling young family, $10,000 felt large enough to become a motive in other people's minds. Then, less than a year after Marilyn's death, Lane remarried. To some, that was practical. He was young, he had a baby, he needed help. To others, it looked cold, almost confirming what they already believed. This is how suspicion hardens in small town. A person stops being judged by evidence and starts being judged by timing, by gossip, by what seems too fast, too calm, too convenient. If you have ever watched a community choose a villain before the facts are ready, you know how certainty can spread faster than truth. For years, that certainty settled on Lane McIntyre. At the same time, another possibility hovered over Columbus. Milwaukee had recently seen brutal murders of women, and for a moment it seemed possible that Marilyn had crossed the path of a roaming predator, but the scene inside her home did not fully match that pattern. She had been attacked where she lived. Her baby was left alive. Nothing suggested a random intruder tearing through the house. The violence was savage yet selective. That contradiction pointed away from chaos and back toward relationship. The case slowed, then it froze. Months passed, then years. Columbus lived under a layer of unfinished grief. Marilyn's family kept calling for updates. Every birthday brought the same wound back. Every passing year made the truth feel both more distant and more necessary. The town moved on in the practical ways towns do. People changed jobs. Children grew up. Stories shifted. But the murder stayed lodged beneath the surface like ice that never fully melts. By 2007, the case might have stayed buried if not for one wrong phone call. Marilyn's niece reached out looking for an update and contacted the wrong agency. That mistake put the case in front of Lieutenant Wayne Smith, who had not even been in high school when Marilyn was killed. He discovered an unsolved homicide sitting in old files, still open, still unfinished. He took it personally, a promise formed around the case. If the years had taken away certainty, he would at least force the truth back into the light. The file itself was messy, full of reports, loose notes, aging records, and the usual damage time does to memory. Witnesses had moved. Some were dead, some remembered less, some remembered differently. But cold cases often turn on one stubborn fact that survived everything else. In this case, it was the tiny blood stain from the sink. Testing methods had changed. What looked like a small red mark in 1980 now revealed something more. It was a mixture. Marilyn's blood was there, along with blood from another contributor. That finding altered the case all at once. The killer had likely been injured and tried to clean up in the bathroom. The sample was weak, degraded and old, but it was not nothing. When the names from the old suspect list were measured against that biological trace, the case tightened sharply. Aaron could be ruled out. Eli could be ruled out. Lane could be ruled out. And for the man who had carried public suspicion for nearly 3 decades, that exclusion was everything. The blood in the sink contained Marilyn's DNA and another man's. It was not Lane's. The focus shifted back to Kurt Forbes. There had already been cracks in his story. He once agreed to take a polygraph and then never showed up. He had later left Wisconsin for Florida. His alibi had always depended on timing and on people who remembered him arriving home. But time weakens memory, and fear weakens it more. When old witnesses were revisited, Kurt's wife Misty no longer sounded sure about the hour he came home. At first she had placed him there early enough to protect him. Years later she could not say whether the time she saw was 2:20 or 4:10. That difference was huge. One version left him clear. The other opened the door to murder. Then came the detail she had kept buried the longest. When Kurt came home that night, there had been blood on his shirt. He was not acting like himself. He was shaking, shivering, agitated in a way that made the night feel wrong even before anyone knew why. That image is difficult to shake because it carries 2 truths at once. On one level, it is simple. A man comes home with blood on him after a woman is killed. On another, it reveals how terror behaves inside intimate spaces. People live next to danger, sleep beside it, defend it, excuse it, and still try to survive it. Kurt was arrested in March 2009, almost 29 years after Marilyn died. The case that followed was far from easy. The DNA result was too weak and too degraded to be admitted at trial. That meant the clearest scientific lead could not be placed directly before the jury. The prosecution was forced to build around the absence, using behavior, timing, witness accounts, and the shape of Kurt's life. Then the case nearly shook loose again. On the stand, Misty backed away from her earlier account. She said she had not seen blood on Kurt's shirt after all. To anyone watching, it looked like the old fear had returned. The silence that protected him in 1980 had simply aged with them both. This is where many people split in their thinking. Some see a recanting witness and feel doubt. Others see the mark of long control. Which explanation feels truer often depends on whether you have ever known what fear can do to a person's memory, their courage, or their voice. But there was another piece waiting. 2 days after his arrest, Kurt spoke with Misty on a recorded prison phone call. She pressed him about the bloody shirt. He did not deny it cleanly. He did not offer an innocent explanation. He refused to talk about it over the phone. In a case built on fragments, that response landed with unusual weight. He sounded like a man who needed privacy, not innocence. There was more. Over time, at least 3 different people heard Kurt speak about the crime in ways that sounded less like rumor and more like confession. The picture around him darkened. He had a history of violence. He controlled Misty. Marilyn had encouraged Misty to leave him, to get away for her own safety. That made Marilyn more than an object of desire. It made her a threat to the hold he had over another woman. On the night of the murder, that hold was already fraying. Kurt had been drinking. He was angry. He made advances toward Rhonda, Lane's sister, and was pushed away. He later went to see a former girlfriend, Jennifer Brown, but her boyfriend was there. Again, he was shut out. Humiliation has a way of looking small from the outside until you see what some men do with it. Rejection is ordinary. Violence is a choice. By the time Kurt turned toward Marilyn's house, the night had narrowed into intent. He knew Lane was at work. He knew the house. He knew he could approach as someone familiar. Marilyn likely opened the door because the face outside did not immediately feel dangerous. That is one of the cruelest parts of this case. The thing that placed her at risk may have been the same thing most people rely on to feel safe. Recognition, familiarity, the belief that known people follow known rules. Inside that home, the attack became frenzied. Marilyn fought. Kurt was injured. He bled in the sink trying to clean himself. Christopher remained in the next room, alive and unaware. The scene that Lane would find hours later had already been set. Marilyn's body was left in a way that felt final, almost displayed, as though the killer wanted the damage scene. Afterward, Kurt went to Misty. He forced his way back into her life, carrying both blood and threat with him. The silence that followed was not proof that nothing happened. It was proof of how long fear can last when the wrong person survives the night. When the verdict finally came, Kurt Forbes was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. For Lane McIntyre, the verdict ended one nightmare and left another untouched. He was cleared in the eyes of the law, but exoneration does not return lost years. It does not erase the whispers, the stares, the assumptions, the way an entire town can look at a grieving husband and decide he feels wrong. It does not give back the first years of Christopher's life, lived under a shadow his father did not deserve. It does not restore Marilyn. It only corrects the record after the damage is done. And yet that correction mattered. For nearly 30 years, Marilyn McIntyre's name sat inside an unanswered story. People knew the brutality, they knew the gossip, they knew the suspects, but they did not know the truth with enough force to end the doubt. In the end, the truth did not arrive cleanly. It came through a degraded stain, a weakening alibi, an old fear finally spoken aloud, and the stubborn refusal to let a dead young mother become just another cold file. Marilyn was 18 years old. She had survived loss as a child, built a home as a teenager, and loved in small, faithful gestures that still ache because they were real. A bite from the corner of a sandwich, a baby held close, a belief that the world inside her front door could stay kind. That belief did not survive the night Kurt Forbes came to her house. But the story did survive. It waded through winters, through rumor, through silence, through the easy lie that time makes justice impossible. In the end, the town that once could not answer who killed Marilyn McIntyre finally had a name to place beside the horror. Not the husband who came home to it, the friend who brought it to the door. And that is where the story ends, in the uneasy place where truth finally catches up, long after innocence has already paid the price.